The holographic star charts flickered off as Professor Vextar's 6 arms folded into a ceremonial dismissal posture. His chitinous face showed the satisfaction of a Krillian warrior who had successfully prepared another generation for the cosmos beyond. Around the circular amphitheater of the Galactic Defense Academy, cadets from 23 different species began gathering their neural interfaces and quantum tablets. Chattering excitedly about tomorrow's final exercise, Daleks Chon stretched, lazily in his seat, yawning as he watched his classmates. 3 years at the academy, and he still found their enthusiasm amusing. Zarek, a towering Centaurian with crystalline skin, was already calculating optimal fleet formations on her bioluminescent fingertips. Thok, the amphibious Aquarian, bubbled nervously through his gill slits while reviewing atmospheric combat maneuvers. Even little Pip, barely 3 feet tall, but possessing the tactical genius typical of the Vorthan collective mind, was interfacing directly with the Academy's war game databases. Another thrilling lecture on the finer points of not dying in space, Alex muttered, earning a few tolerant chuckles from nearby cadets. They'd grown accustomed to his irreverent humor over the years. If anything, his presence had taught them that humans, despite their reputation for unpredictability, could be remarkably ordinary. Professor Vextar's compound eyes fixed on the one group with ancient wisdom. Tomorrow, you face the Shadowmere Nebula simulation. Those of you who survive with acceptable tactical scores will receive your commission assignments. His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. I trust you will remember that in real space, there are no respawn protocols. As cadets began filing out, excited conversations filled the corridors. Assignment postings were the culmination of everything they'd trained for. Their first real step into the vast galactic community their species had fought to join. I heard Zarok is getting the diplomatic course posting to the Andorian trade. Roots, whispered Thok to his podmate Coral. And they say Pip's entire collective will be assigned to the Strategic Planning Division on Terra Nova. Alex was gathering his things slowly, as usual, when Zarok turned to him with her crystalline features arranged in what passed for friendly curiosity among her kind. What about you, Alex? Where do you think they'll place the Academy's most creative strategist? The question caught the attention of nearby cadets. They'd all wondered about the human's future most, assuming he'd end up in some safe administrative role, perhaps managing supply routes in the inner systems, where his species' tendency toward chaos couldn't cause too much damage. Alex paused, his hand hovering over his tablet. For a moment, his usual grin faded, replaced by something his classmates had never seen before, a distant, almost haunted expression that seemed to peer into spaces beyond the Academy walls. Oh, he said casually, shouldering his pack. I'm reporting to the Void Walker next week. Admiral Morrison's Deep Recon Unit. We're mapping the dark sectors beyond the galactic rim. The corridor fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every translator unit paused. Even the atmospheric recyclers seemed to hold their breath. 22 pairs of alien eyes compound, multifaceted, bioluminescent, and cybernetic stared at the human who had just casually mentioned a name that haunted the nightmares of seasoned veterans. The Void Walker, Admiral Morrison's Suicide Squad, the unit that mapped regions where reality itself became unreliable, where ancient things drifted between dead stars, where 90% of volunteers never returned, and those who did often wished they hadn't. Alex looked around at their shocked faces and shrugged. Should be interesting, he said, then walked away whistling an old Earth tune, leaving behind a corridor full of cadets who suddenly realized they might never have known their human classmate at all. Asterisk the Shadowmere Nebula hung before them, like a wound in space itself, its purple and black tendrils seeming to writhe with malevolent life, even in the Academy's most advanced holographic projectors. Within the simulation chamber, 47 graduating cadets stood at their command stations. Bio-readings monitored, neural interfaces active, ready to prove themselves worthy of their commissions. Alex stood at Station 23, always the back row, always overlooked. But today, something was different. His classmates kept stealing glances at him, whispers following in his wake. The revelation about his assignment to the Void Walker had spread through the academy like quantum entanglement, instantaneous and unsettling. "Attention, cadets," Professor Vextar's voice resonated through the chamber's neural networks. "The Shadowmere Nebula has been a graveyard for 17 different fleets over the past century. Your mission: establish a reconnaissance outpost on the nebula's edge while managing limited resources and unknown hostiles. Begin." The simulation exploded into motion. Virtual view screens materialized around each cadet, displaying tactical readouts, resource allocations, and fleet positions. Most immediately began following standard Academy protocols: establish perimeter, scan for threats, begin systematic exploration. Zarak, as crystalline form, pulsed with bioluminescent calculations as she orchestrated a beautiful defensive formation. Fox amphibious features rippled with concentration as he managed atmospheric fighters. Pip's collective mind interface glowed as multiple consciousness streams processed data simultaneously. Alex, however, did something unexpected. He sat down. While his classmates frantically managed fleets and analyzed sensor data, Alex simply observed. His fingers occasionally brushed his control interface, making minute adjustments that seemed almost random. His eyes tracked the nebulas, movements with an intensity none of them had seen before. Chun called Lieutenant Mora, one of the simulation observers, a stern Regelian whose species prided themselves on military precision. "Your fleet is maintaining minimal activity. Are you experiencing technical difficulties?" Alex looked up with that familiar grin, but his eyes held depths that made the lieutenant's photosynthetic skin ripple with unease. "Just watching the patterns, sir. Sometimes you have to listen before you speak." What happened next would be discussed in Academy halls for decades to come. The nebula's edge erupted with hostile signatures, not the expected simulation challenges, but something else entirely. Warning klaxons screamed as the chamber's safety. Protocols began failing. What should have been a controlled exercise was becoming something far more dangerous. While panic spread through the ranks of cadets. While Professor Vextar's multiple arms flew over emergency controls, while even the collective genius of Pip's hive mind struggled to comprehend the cascading system failures, Alex Chun stood up and began to work. His fingers moved across holographic interfaces with surgical precision. Commands flowed from his station with such speed and complexity that the chamber's quantum processors strained to keep up. He wasn't following any protocol they'd learned. He was writing new ones in real time. "Zarak, pull your crystalline cruisers. Back to grid 77 Alpha," he called out, his voice carrying an authority that made the Zentarian comply without question. "Doc, I need your atmospheric fighters running interference pattern Delta-9... No, not the Academy version, the one they don't teach here." His classmates stared as Alex orchestrated a response to the simulation's malfunction with the same casual ease he'd once shown discussing cafeteria food. The human who'd spent 3 years making jokes about photon torpedo trajectories was now implementing strategies that seemed to bend the laws of space-time themselves. "How do you know that formation?" whispered Coral, her aquatic features rippling. With confusion, Alex glanced at her, and for just a moment, his mask slipped completely. "Because," he said quietly, "I've used it before." The simulation chamber's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as system failures cascaded through the Academy's most advanced training facility. What had begun as a routine graduation exercise had become something unprecedented, complete breakdown of safety protocols that threatened to turn holographic dangers into very real ones, while professors shouted orders and technical staff rushed to manually override the quantum processors. Alex Chun worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had faced genuine crisis before. His movements were economical, precise, lacking any of the theatrical flourishes his classmates remembered from their shared years of training. Impossible, breathed Professor Vextar as he monitored Alex's tactical display. The human was coordinating, a response that violated every principle of conventional fleet doctrine, yet somehow held together with an internal logic that made the Krillian's compound eyes ache to follow. Zarak's crystalline features pulsed with rapid calculations. Alex, those maneuvers, they're not in any database. Where did you learn? Asterisk. Questions later, Alex interrupted, his voice carrying a command authority that made several cadets unconsciously straighten to attention. Right now, we have bigger problems. The Shadowmere Nebula simulation had evolved beyond its programming. Parameters. Instead of the scripted challenges they trained for, something genuinely alien was emerging from the holographic dark patterns of energy that seemed to think, to hunt, to hunger. Thok's gill slits fluttered in terror as his sensor. Readings showed impossible geometries forming in the simulated space around them. The nebula ... It's not just a navigation hazard. There's something alive in there. Alex nodded grimly. There always was. That's why 17 fleets never came home. His fingers danced across interfaces that most of his classmates hadn't even known existed, accessing academy databases with clearance levels that should have been far beyond any cadet's reach. Schematics filled his displays, not of standard ships, but of vessels designed for operations in regions where normal physics became suggestions rather than laws. Admiral Morrison's ships, whispered Pip, her collective mind recognizing the designs from classified intelligence briefings. But how do you have access? Because, Alex said quietly, making a final series of adjustments that stabilized the failing simulation. I've been Admiral Morrison's advance scout for the past 2 years. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of cooling quantum processors. Alex turned to face his classmates, and they saw him clearly for the first time. Gone was the casual irreverence, the deliberate mediocrity, the carefully maintained facade of harmless incompetence. What stood before them was someone who had walked in darkness between stars, who had mapped territories where nightmares took physical form, who had returned from places that broke the minds of seasoned veterans. The Void Walker doesn't recruit, he explained, his voice carrying the weight of experiences none of them could imagine. It finds people who are already walking into the dark. My academy records, my performance reviews, even my psychological evaluations, all carefully constructed to hide what I really am. Zarak's bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion and growing fear. What are you? Alex looked at her, with eyes that had seen the birth and death of realities, that had gazed into the spaces between dimensions where ancient intelligences dreamed of consuming entire galaxies. I'm the person they send when the galaxy needs someone crazy enough to go where angels fear to tread, and compassionate enough to come back and report what's waiting for us out there. The simulation chamber's main display showed the Shadowmere, Nebula returning to its programmed parameters, the crisis resolved by techniques that existed in no textbook. But now his classmates understood that their final exercise had been no accident. It had been a demonstration, a graduation gift from someone who had already graduated from fears they were only beginning to comprehend. The dark sectors aren't empty, Alex continued, his voice gentle but implacable. They're full of things that make the Shadowmere look like a peaceful garden. And someone has to map them, catalog them, find ways to keep them from noticing our little galactic civilization. He smiled then, an expression that carried both infinite sadness and unshakable hope. That's what humans do. We're the species that volunteers to check under the bed for monsters. Asterisk in the hours following the simulation crisis, Alex found himself in Professor Vextar's private office, a space most cadets never saw, filled with artifacts from a dozen wars and trophies from campaigns fought in the dark spaces between star systems. The Krillian warrior's 6 arms moved in patterns of respect as he poured 2 cups of Centaurian meditation brew. "How long has the Academy known?" Alex asked, accepting the cup with hands that no longer trembled from maintaining his 3-year. Deception. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Since the day you arrived." Admiral Morrison personally briefed Academy Command about Operation Shepherd, the placement of advanced scouts within our training programs to identify and evaluate potential recruits for deep sector operations. Alex nodded, unsurprised. Void Walker never left anything to chance, especially not the psychological profiles of beings who might one day stand between civilization and the they, things that dwelt in the spaces where light had never shone. "Your classmates," Vextar continued, "they were never in real danger today. The simulation chamber has 17 different failsafe protocols, but they needed to see you as you truly are, not the carefully constructed persona you've maintained." "Why?" Alex sipped the brew, feeling its quantum-aligned molecules settle his nervous system. A necessity for anyone who had spent time in regions where the laws of physics became optional. "Because," said a new voice from the office doorway, "they're coming with you." Admiral Morrison entered the room with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battles that officially never happened. Her uniform bore no insignia that appeared in any military database, and her eyes held the same haunted depths that Alex recognized in mirrors. The 22 alien cadets filed in behind her, their faces showing a mixture of terror, determination, and something approaching understanding. Zarak's crystalline features pulsed with nervous energy. Fox gill slits fluttered with barely controlled fear. Even Pip's collective mind seemed subdued by the magnitude of what they were contemplating. "A Void Walker mission profile is changing," Morrison announced. "For 2 centuries, we've sent human scouts into the dark sectors alone. But the entities we're discovering, they're evolving, adapting, learning from each encounter. We need perspective that human minds cannot provide." Alex set down his cup, understanding flooding through him. "A mixed-species crew, the first in the unit's history," Morrison confirmed. 23 different ways of perceiving reality. 23 different approaches to problems that have no solutions in normal space. Your classmates volunteered after today's demonstration." Zarak stepped forward, her bioluminescent patterns showing the deep purple hues of Centaurian determination. "We've spent 3 years learning to trust each other. Today we learned that some of us have been protecting the rest without us ever knowing. That kind of trust, ... it doesn't break easily." Thok's amphibious features rippled with nervous energy. Besides, someone has to keep Alex from getting too serious. He was much more fun when he was pretending to be incompetent. The room filled with something that might have been laughter, if laughter could carry the weight of beings who had just volunteered to walk into the kind of darkness that existed between the death of one universe and the birth of the next. Admiral Morrison's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The Void Walker departs in 72 hours. Your families have been notified that you're being assigned to long-range reconnaissance, which is technically true. The psychological preparation will begin immediately." Alex looked around at his classmates, his crew, and felt something he hadn't experienced in months of solitary scouting missions. Hope. Not the desperate kind that kept scouts sane in the dark sectors, but the real thing, born from the knowledge that even in the deepest darkness, no one had to walk alone. "One question," Pip said, her collective mind's voice carrying harmonics. "Of curiosity, why is it called the Void Walker?" Admiral Morrison smiled with genuine warmth. "Because," she said, "sometimes the only way to protect the light is to learn how to dance with the dark. The Void Walker hung in space like a dream of midnight given form. Unlike the sleek, optimistic lines of standard galactic vessels, Morrison's ship embraced the darkness it was designed to explore. Its hull absorbed light rather than reflecting it, and its corridors hummed with energies that existed in the spaces between conventional physics. Alex stood on the observation deck with his crew. He still found it strange to think of them that way, watching their home galaxy shrink to a spiral of distant light. In 48 hours, they would cross the galactic rim into regions where matter behaved according to rules older than the Big Bang. "I've been analyzing the ship's specifications," Zarek said, her crystalline features reflecting the star field. "In fractal patterns, and navigation systems use principles I don't recognize. How do you plot a course to places that don't technically exist?" "Very carefully," Alex replied, but his tone lacked its old irreverence. Out here, precision wasn't just professional, it was survival. The dark sectors aren't empty space. They're spaces where different realities intersect. Navigation becomes more like ... diplomacy. Fox amphibious form rippled with nervous energy. And the things we're likely to encounter? Alex was quiet for a long moment, watching the last familiar constellations fade into the cosmic background. Imagine consciousness without the limitations of physical form. Imagine intelligence that predates the formation of galaxies. Imagine entities that dream entire universes into existence, and then forget about them. "Comforting," muttered Coral, her aquatic features showing the pale hues of suppressed terror. "Actually," Alex said, turning to face them all, "it is. Because if they were actively hostile, we would have been extinct billions of years ago. Most of them don't even notice us. We're like ... microbes observing leviathans. The trick is not to catch their attention while we're mapping their territories." Pip's collective mind pulsed with shared anxiety and curiosity. "And when we do catch their attention?" Alex's smile held echoes of experiences that had aged him in ways his chronological age couldn't measure. "That's when we find out if 23 different perspectives are enough to survive what one human mind cannot." Admiral Morrison's voice echoed through the ship's neural network. "All hands, prepare for RIM translation. We'll be crossing into Sector 0 in 30 minutes. The crew dispersed to their stations, but Alex remained on the observation deck as the Void Walker oriented itself toward the absolute darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. He thought about his classmates at the academy, now scattered across safe assignments in civilized space. They would live normal lives, fight conventional wars, love and laugh, and die under stars that obeyed predictable laws. And he thought about the report hidden in his personal files, the one that detailed his encounter with something in the Kepler void that had spoken his name before he'd given it, that had known about Earth before humanity had achieved spaceflight, that had whispered secrets about the galaxy's future in languages that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000,000 years. Entity had called him Shepherd, the same designation Morrison used for advanced scouts. But it had also called him something else, in a voice like collapsing dimensions. Herald of the coming light. As the Void Walker engaged its reality displacement drives and slipped sideways through dimensions that had no names, Alex wondered if his crew understood what they had truly volunteered for. Not just exploration, but preparation. Because somewhere in the dark sectors, ancient intelligences were stirring from eons of sleep, and when they woke fully, even the shadows between galaxies would not be dark enough to hide in. The ship crossed the galactic rim and entered spaces where courage was measured not by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to carry light into places that had never known its touch. Behind them, the Milky Way galaxy wheeled in its ancient dance, unaware that its newest guardians had just stepped into the dark to ensure it would continue spinning for countless eons more. In the observation deck's reflection, Alex saw not the class clown who had fooled an academy, but the person he had always been. A shepherd walking ahead of the flock, checking the path for wolves that wore the faces of gods. The real adventure was just beginning. Asterisk.